I thought there was also the other part where he says, what is it that gives, that testifies that the new generation are now integrating the contract is the enjoyment of property. I don't think it's public property.
He says enjoying your property, and one of the examples he gives is like a nice highway. Like if you're enjoying the highway, yeah. It's like what does that mean?
Yeah, I was kind of confused in that section. See, yeah, it provides one example of like, okay, you can own land where you're like renting a hotel or something for
or if you're walking on the sidewalk.
Yeah. So what kind of property is that if you don't actually own it?
That's my issue. It's like he's saying majority rule, but also you're implicitly part of the contract because you're walking on the sidewalk, even if you're like you have no money. So like, and he also thinks that the point of the state is to protect property, whatever that means to him. So like, if you're a landless peasant and you're fed up by like whatever the state's doing in favor of like the property owning class, you can't effectively rebel because if you rebel, you are destroying life and liberty.
Okay, cool.
Sorry.
So no, that works. So let's think about, you may be right. Let's think about the actual historical events that happened in 17th century. Both the people without anything and the people with something to lose rebelled against the crown. Then, as you'll see with the levelers, for a while they were both on the side of both sides, on the side of Parliament, and they each had their own reasons to fight against it. Then, once the crown is defeated, though, it turns out that these two factions weren't fighting for the same thing. And the real conflict begins between those two. That's what the levelers represent. People without property who say something like, look, you're the property owners, but we made sacrifices. We have a life to live. And we shed our blood and made sacrifices to defeat the absolute monarchy. Now, you give us a vote. We want to be represented in Parliament like truly, not kind of metaphysically. And if we don't have the right to vote, we don't have an obligation to obey the kind of government that you're going to install. So this kind of hesitation, this situation here is right on the, it's exactly the central political question. I mean, can anybody doubt that? It seems to me that Locke is very clearly on the side of the property owners. He has something to offer to those who don't, because they too, like you said, own something themselves. And this is not just some philosophical concession. It's a real concession that capitalism brought about for the laboring classes. Before, you didn't own your own ability to labor, now you do. Be thankful. But then, as far as the kind of estates, overlook. And even as far as life, because if you are a landless peasant, you don't eat. So the question of property is totally bound up with the question of property, it turns out. So there's all that. Let me show you, let's just do a little sequence of passages just to lock in the fact that Locke has a certain psychologically curious obsession with the type of scenario. Page 15. The very beginning of paragraph 18. We'll just do this quicker. So, topic 15. This makes it lawful for a man to kill a thief. Then, middle of paragraph 19, same page. Thus a thief, page 50. Thus a thief, whom I cannot harm, if I appeal to the law for having stolen all that I'm worth, I may kill. Oh, look, another one. When he sets on me to rob me, bottle my horse or coat, because the law of blah blah blah. You take my stuff, that penalty. It enforced by me. Anyway, there's thieves about it. Then you go skip towards the material for this week, page 91. Paragraph 176. Robbers and pirates, charged with spelled with a Y. Listen to this. Should a robber break into my house and with a dagger at my throat make me seal deeds to convey my estate to him? Would this give him any titles? Okay, so there's thieves on the road. There's people break into your house. Let's go to 94. Middle of paragraph 181. For he that breaks into my house and violently turns me out of doors, or having peaceably got in by force keeps me out, doesn't affect him again. Serious business with that. 95. Again with the thief on the highway, middle of the first paragraph, or the top of page 95. Though I may kill the thief that sets on me on the highway. Well, listen to this, another one. For though I may kill a thief that sets on me on the highway, yet I may not, which seems less. Take away his money. Again, properly translated.
And the knife set his leg, he's rolling around his house.
House is stuff first. 97. Middle of paragraph 186. He that forced, now they're going after his horse. He that forces my horse from me, blah blah blah. And then, nor skipping a few lines, nor does it at all alter the case to say again. Again, when I put my hand in my pocket, deliver my purse, myself to a thief who demands it with a pistol in my breast, are you okay? Just a while.
Just like robbery and
So I remember when I said that all this landless people, remember the Robin Hoods in there? What happened? That very significant number of people who used to have by tradition under feudalism access to the land, including the commons, but not just the commons, they had access to the land of the aristocracy. They were physically removed and excluded from this through the blood process of inclusion, the lifting up of these fences and hedges. Where do they go? That's the problem. They have nowhere to be. And so these instances of banditry were very common to the point that the legal history of the monarchical government shows that they kind of hysterically put in more and more savage punishments against forms of banditry, like to the point of mutilation and death, because it was such a massive problem. And something, right? So something in Locke's mentality is really obsessed with this thing that's more. One of three. More thieves and robbers. No, 7 lines in the top. And houses. He that hath authority to seize my person in the street may be opposed as a thief and a robber and breaks into my house. 105. Middle of 105. A man with a sword in his hand demands my purse on the highway. Again, he wants to kill him. Kill the bastard. 115. Robbers and pirates. You get the what's the idea? A kind of pathological obsession with money. In a text that's supposed to be a kind of high level of thinking about political philosophy, none of this is right. None of it. And Aristotle and Plato were writing. Put more gently, the question of property becomes, begins to dominate thinking about politics, even though these scenarios aren't even about politics, but they're his way to kind of think about politics through the everyday experience of I got my stuff, house, horse, purse, whatever, and someone's coming to take it. And someone got to do something about that. What is the someone doing? Well, in a way, that couldn't do something. When's the last time the government has stated to you explicitly that they are there because they are there to protect the property of the rich? They don't exactly do that. Well, that's what they do. And law, in a certain sense, manifests this, gives away the game through this book. There's all these complications, right? I mean, I don't just mean stuff, but you mostly mean stuff to the point that you are prepared to fold liberty and life under stuff. To give it a name, property is property. You could have said life and folded property and liberty into it, but no. He chooses property and folds life and liberty. What does it mean? The property owners are finally at the helm of politics. The government, they're groping for, they're trying to assemble a new set of political institutions that are going to be there to protect their interests in a way that the old state wouldn't and couldn't. Now we have a situation in which the levels of social inequality in this country are unprecedented. But yeah, don't fret, we have a democracy. The government's there to protect it. So Locke is important for this. And again, without negating the immense, historically progressive content of this book, and particularly the last chapter. But not just the last chapter, all this crap about property. Seen from our miserable standpoint, we're struggling to scrape by, can be a little annoying. But Locke is trying to kind of wipe out once and for all an old social system in which you didn't even have the right to own your own labor, which sucked even worse. So from a historical standpoint, good for him. And then there's the issue of who's included and who's excluded in this so-called majority. Can we find the most important passages where he reassures us that the government is there as the expression of the will and consensus of the majority?
On 55, talks about, for example, well, the whole chapter 8, the whole thing is about how Sparta is so great because the people chose the kings to rule them. He talks about there are great governments in Peru. For a long time, had better kings or foremost, but lived in troops that they.
Okay, this is not exactly important, but this also matters because what he's trying to do in this chapter. Again, he's fighting for it. He is insisting that the true origin of government is consent. It's not coercion. And he's insisting against this to a degree also because it's hard. And then he's saying, yes, in other chapters too, he says, yes, the original governments were monarchies, but they were not necessarily hereditary monarchies. And they certainly were not granted by the people who consented to them kind of some absolute arbitrary power. It was more of a practical arrangement which makes sense. In other words, he's trying to fend off that part of Filmer's argument that rests on this notion that it's always been the strength of the God-given authority and strength of the ruler. For Locke, importantly, and again to his credit, the issue is not force to extend government, the issue is consent. Because the government, the proper origin of government.
On page 66, paragraph 124, it says the great and chief and therefore of men's uniting into commonwealths and putting themselves under government is the preservation of their property.
That's definitely one among, in that long list of statements that he makes about it. We're looking for this issue of the majority. That is the consent of the majority. This is the most important thing to come out of this class is what is the purpose of government for law? The protection of property. With an asterisk and all the complications. Now we're dealing with, okay, now let's say the government is in place. Who controls it? And he invokes the majority repeatedly, so let's look at some of these.
On 52, the start of paragraph 56, he's like, for when any number of men have by the consent of every individual lead a community, they have thereby made that community one body, but the power to act as one body, which only by will and determination of the majority, or that which acts in community, being only the consent of the individual.
That's good. Let's just go with this. It's not the only time where it says that, but it's certainly good. And you read the majority, and what do you think? Oh, the majority of everybody. Is there a passage in this book where he clarifies, hey, look, fellas, I don't mean the majority of everybody. Wink, wink. You know, I mean the property owners. There is no such passage. But this is the great optical illusion of this book. Because sometimes Locke is also taught as a democrat. The regime that Locke is defending, remember the very first page where he talks about William the Restorer from that, the outcome of the 1688 revolution which Locke participated in, which his boss was one of the main leaders on the side of it, all of that. Right? What came out of that revolution? Democracy? Hell no. As I told you in the lecture early on, it will take how long for democracy to finally come to life? This is one of the lectures. How long? When did democracy finally come to life? Which century? Which one? And before? Yes, let's get more specifically to the issue of the vote. Who has the right to vote and the right to run for office? Remember I said there was an initial reform in 1832, which opened up the suffrage to a broader section of the English population, and even after that, only 1 out of 7 adult males in England had the right to vote. You guessed which. In other words, when Locke is talking about the majority, I want to say, he doesn't say it, and he doesn't need to say it. That's the thing, because the levelers are done, closed, eclipsed from history until they will be rediscovered later on. He means to say the majority of the public. Is it speculative? I don't think it's speculative at all, because this is the kind of political system that he's defending overtly. Page 1 of this book. He featured what? Elections in parliament, representation, yes to all of that. But if you're a famous quote, manless peasant, but even well above that, you don't get to vote and you don't get to run for office. Locke has no problem with it. None. Why would he have a problem if he made a career coming off of the money of that guy? National Keeper first architect. How could he have a problem? Any questions? Yep.
Do you think like his not concession, but like his belief that like the peasants own their own labor is kind of like a false consciousness thing that he's giving for these? He's like, oh, it's not like that.
Why is it? What's false about it?
No, as in like he's telling them, oh, this is you're basically not basically the same as a landowner, but like you're just as much of a property owner as this guy. So like,
But he doesn't
you can-
even, right, he doesn't even say that, right?
Right.
That one time he makes a distinction between people and people, what do you get? The industrious and the rational, as opposed to the